We're now on Daf Zayin with base 4 lines down from the top. B'mai ukimta. The Gemara is now asking on the way we interpreted Rabbi Yossi ben Shaul as referring to Safna Me'ara. And we're talking about the Easter of Beitza that was found on Yontif in the nest, in the bird's nest on Yontif in the morning before Alos HaShachar. He had checked the nest on Erev Yontif going into Yontif and he didn't find any eggs. And we interpreted that Rabbi Yossi was talking about a case of Safna Me'ara. Those are, eggs that are hatched on the ground. And we assume that therefore the egg could have been laid at night. And that's why it's going to be Asur Mishum Muktzah, because it was a Beitza Shenolda beyond. So the Gemara asks, my area Badak, Kilo Badak Nami. Why are you telling me that the reason why it's Asur is he checked the nest going into Yontif? Forget about it. Even if he didn't check the nest, he finds at Alos HaShachar an egg inside the nest. He's going to have to assume that it was laid during the course of the night. And if we're talking about a case of Safna Me'ara, then the Tarnagolas will lay these eggs in the nighttime. The Gemara answers, Kilo Badak, Ema Me Esmol Havoy. If he hadn't checked the nest before Yontif, then we can be tola, we can present the possibility that the egg was laid even before Yontif, and therefore it would be Muteres Lachila. And Rov Tarnagolos, Yoldos B'yom, even those that are Mischamos Menakaka, even in the case of Safna Me'ara. So had he not checked the nest going into Yontif, we would assume that the hen laid the egg not during the nighttime, but rather during the daytime, and it would be mutter. Because Nachana was Mibod Yom before Yontif. So Gemara says, if this be the case, and in this situation where he did not check the nest going into Yontif, we could be tola, we could be lenient and assume that the Beitza was born during the day of Erev Yontif. If that be the case, Kibodet Nami, even if he checked the nest going into Yontif and he didn't find the Beitza there, we could still be tola, the Ema Yotzav Ruba V'chazra V'hi. Rabbi Yochanan, we have the Shita Rabbi Yochanan that if most of the egg came out of the body on Erev Yontif, even though it went back into the body, it was re-swallowed, reabsorbed into the innards of the hen, and then it was laid officially on Yontif. It's still mutter because the later took place on Erev Yontif with Rubo. Is Yotza Rubo, even though Chazrubo, nevertheless, it's already considered later, and this later took place on Erev Yontif. So therefore, if he didn't check on Erev Yontif the nest, then we said that we could be mekil and assume that the egg was laid during the day. So the Gemara now argues, even if he hadn't checked the nest going into Yontif, we could still, even if he did check the egg on Erev Yontif, and there was no egg there, we could still assume that there was a later beforehand. Where did the egg disappear magically? The answer is it went back, it was reabsorbed into the mother's intestine. More answers to Rabbi Yochanan Shchia. Such a scenario is rare, and therefore we're not going to be tola on something that's so rare. Yom Rabbi Yossi ben Sholem Arav, hi too much chika sakanta legiluye. That chopped up garlic, if you leave it around, it's got a sakana which is called gilu. You're not allowed to leave it open. We're always afraid that a serpent might come and put its venom, because the nechashim have a great desire for garlic. And not only we love garlic, but the nechashim love garlic. And therefore, what happens is that when the serpent smells the garlic, he is attracted, he starts chewing them up, and he starts shooting out his venom into the garlic, and it's very dangerous. So magulim, with regard to garlic, is a very dangerous proposition. Okay, Rabbosai, now we get back to another part of our mission at the beginning of Masechet Beitza, and that is the Machlokas Beisil Beit Shammai regarding the shear, the minimum shear for the violation of chametz. And the Torah says, Shivas Yomim Si Orlo Yimotzi Batechem. And the Torah, in the lav of Bal Yimotze, that you're not allowed possession, mentions not chametz, but siar. And siar has to be gotten rid of on Pesach. Siar is a very heavy leavened bread after a long time fermentation, and it has the power to, as a leavening agent, to cause fermentation, speed up fermentation if you throw it into a dough. That's called siar. And the Torah says, Lo yiralecha chametz. So we have Lo yimotze with regard to siar, and we have Lo yiroeh with regard to chametz. And our Mishnah records a machlokas tanoim with regard to the shear of chametz. Beit Shammai omrim siar b'kezayis, b'chametz b'kosevitz. U'beisil omrim zeh v'zeh b'kezayis. So as far as siar is concerned, there's no machlokes between Beisil Beit Shammai. Everyone agrees the shear is a kezayis. We have a machlokus between Beit Shammai and Beis Hillel with regard to the shear of chametz. Beit Shammai of the opinion that the shear of chametz is a larger shear than kezayis. You're not chayav for less than a koseves, which is a date. And Beis Hillel say you're chayav already on chametz for kezayis. Again, what are we talking about? We're talking about the Isra Achilas Chametz. We're talking about the Isra of Shehias Chametz, meaning Bal Yirah B'Yimotze with a mitzvah beer. That we'll see as we go along. My Tamai the Beit Shammai. What led Beit Shammai to the conclusion that there's a fundamental difference in the shear of Chametz and Siyar? That in the case of Siyar, you violate with Kezayis. In the case of Chametz, you don't violate it unless you have a Koseves. And he's being Mekil in Chametz. And the Gemara answers that Beit Shammai came to two conclusions. One is built on the other. So the first conclusion was that the shear of chametz and siyar are different, one from the other. And then two possible matching candidate shiurim. One is the smaller one, l'chumra, that's chametz. The other is a large one, l'kula, that's koseves. He's going to put chumra with chumra and kula with kula. That's going to be the second premise. So the first premise is in Cain, if you would argue, according to Beit Shammai's logic, that both chametz and siyar share the same identical shear, then lichtov rachmana chametz, below boy siyar, the Torah didn't even have to mention siyar. I mean, siyar is chametz. It's even more severe than chametz. It's chimuto kosher. It's a very advanced, powerful state of chimus. Ano amino ma chametz she'ein chimuto kosher because I is siyar shechimuto kosher lo kolchken. I would certainly derive the conclusion that if the Torah was machmir in chametz and requires and sets the shear as a kezayis, as small as it is, then how much more so in the case of chimutzei kosher, which is siyar, how much more so would you violate these for a kezayis? And therefore the question arises, b'siyar de koser achmon alamal. Why did the Torah feel compelled to mention siyar? And the answer could only be lo malacha eshiyur shel zeh lo keshiyur shel zeh. Now, we have a principle in the Gemara Makis that we don't derive an azhar from a kal v'chomer. Here we seem to be willing to derive an azhar in siyar, according to Beit Shammai, from a kal v'chomer from chametz. And the Pnei Yoshua says, "Ein kan ein ze kikol Kal v'chomer shelamedim davar chadash ela bi'urahu shekevan shasior af hu chametz ela she'af mechametz acherim. So then we're not going to apply that principle of ein mazir min adid, because again, sior has chametz plus. It's an advanced stage beyond chametz. Okay, so now we have the first conclusion of Beit Shammai that ein shiurim shel zeh kishiur shel zeh. So we know now that the shiur of sior and the shiur of chametz are different, and that justifies the Torah having to write out sior and not leave it to our own calculation of kal v'chomer. Okay, so now we have a choice. We have two shiurim. One l'chomer, that's the minimum, the smaller one, that's called kezais, and another l'kula, which is a koseves. So Rashi addresses the question as to why we assume that Sior gets the shear of kezais and chametz of koseves. Rashi explains, based on the Gemara in Yoma, Daf Ayin Tes, with regard to Achila and Yom HaKippur, the Yisra Achila, which the shear is koseves, and the Gemara explains that why do we up the ante, so to speak, for a greater shear on Yom Kippur, which is a kula, namely from kezais to koseves? And the Gemara answers, because a shear of koseves is miyasheves daito shel adam, yisuvei daito. So we're going to apply this logic of the Yisra Achil of Yom Kippur to the Yisra Achil of chametz, and we're going to say that in chametz, the Isur is koseves like it is with regard to Achila and Yom Kippur. And why is that? And again, we don't have the svara of Yisuvei Daite with regard to the Isur Achilas Chametz, but what we're going to say is that since there's a difference in the shear, according to Beit Shammai, that is already established between Siyar and Chametz. So therefore, we need that the Torah should write out Siyar. What justifies that? We could have derived Siyar with the kal v'chomer. The answer is that what the Torah wants to teach us is that Siyar is more chamur than chametz, and the shear is going to be a kezais. Whereas in the case of chametz, we're going to be more mekil, it's not chimutzo kasha, and therefore you will not violate this iser until you have a koseves, which is larger than a kezais. Now, all this is to explain Beit Shammai. Beis Hillel, on the other hand, have to address the question of Beit Shammai. Why did the Torah have to spell out Siyar? I could certainly derive Siyar from a kal v'chomer from chametz. And again, Beit Shammai was arguing that if the Torah b'chol zot seemingly unnecessarily added a lav of Siyar, it must be telling me that Siyar has a chumrah that doesn't exist in chametz. But now we go to Beis Hillel. The Beis Hillel say the following: Tzrichi, your kasha Beit Shammai. Why did the Torah have to add Siyar, which is chimutzo kasha? We could learn it from kal v'chomer. It's not a kasha. We need the Torah to spell out Siyar. The ikas of Rachmana Siyar. Let's go in both directions. Let's say the Torah had written only Siyar. Havamina would have said the Torah is being machmir in Siyar. Get rid of it. Mishum de chimutzo kasha. Avol chametz the ein chimutzo kasha. It's considered kal. Is ema lo. I might think that chametz is not awesome. The Torah only prohibited that which is chimutzo kasha. So had the Torah mentioned Siyar and not mentioned chametz, we wouldn't know chametz. You couldn't derive chametz from Siyar because Siyar is more chamer than chametz. Now we go the other direction. So that's tzricha. The Torah had to write chametz. But now the other way, the flip side. Ikasav rachmana chametz. Why didn't the Torah just simply say chametz? And now Beis Hillel come up with a new svara that maybe the Torah is machmer only to prohibit chametz mishum de roy lachila. Chametz is edible. Aval siar ein roy lachila, shein roy lachila, emol lo. Maybe the Torah didn't prohibit it. Tricha, we need the Torah to spell out siar because siar is not roy lachila. Okay. So now the Gemara has a kasha on Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai differentiate between shear of siar and the shear of chametz. Frek the Gemara, who Beit Shammai leslu de Rabbi Zera. Again, Rabbi Zera is after Beit Shammai, but didn't Beit Shammai accept the logic of Rabbi Zera? The Rabbi Zera, Pasak HaKosav b'siar v'siyem b'chametz. The Torah says, in Parshas Bo, of course, Shivas Yomim Siar Lo Yimotzi Batechem, mentioning Siar. And then it says, Kikol Ochel Machmetzes. It doesn't say Kikol Ochel Siar. It mentions Chametz. So we could say, Pasach B'Siar V'Siyem B'Chametz. Why? Lo malacha zeu siar zeu chametz, meaning that they both have the same din. That's why the Torah substituted chametz for siar, to tell you they both have the same din. How could Beit Shammai disagree with this logic and hold that chametz has a different din than siar, as far as shiurim are concerned? And Gemara answers, linyan achila. Wow, this is a revolutionary change in our understanding of the machlokes Beisil Beit Shammai. As far as Achil is concerned, Kuli Alma, both Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai agree. Lo pligi, they have no machlokas. And Beit Shammai concede to Beit Hillel that as far as Achil is concerned, the shear of chametz and the shear of siar is a kazayis. And for Achila of a kazayis of chametz, Beit Shammai also agree to vichayah. Ki pligi linyan biur. As far as the mitzvah of destroying chametz and the prohibitions of bal yirah b'yimatzi for owning chametz, Beit Shammai savre lo yalfin biur me'achila. In other words, the laws of biur l'chud, the laws of achila l'chud, we have no analogy between the two, and therefore the Torah had to write out the iser of chametz and the iser of siar, each one in the pasuk. Lo yirah l'cha chametz, lo yirah siar. And we're not going to learn that just like as far as achila is concerned, the Torah equated the shear of chametz with the shear of siar. They both have the identical shear of a kazayis, and therefore the same din should apply to biur, meaning ownership of chametz, and the Torah would equate chametz and siar as far as the shear is concerned. No, they have two different shiurim chalukim. Chametz is b'koseves and siar is b'kazayis. Beisil savri yalfinon biur me'achila. That just like the Torah equates siar and chametz as far as the shear of kazayis and achila, so too the Torah would equate the shear of siar and chametz with regard to bal yirah b'yimatzi, and that is the shear of kazayis. Itmar nami, we have a tradition from our base medrash that Omar of Yossi Bar Chanina machlokes and machlokes Beit Hillel Beit Shammai is dafka linyan biur, that Beit Shammai say that you violate the Isur bal yirah b'yimatzi with regard to siar b'kazayis, with regard to chametz only b'kikoseves. According to Beit Hillel, in all cases you violate with a kazayis. Afal inyan achila divrei hakol zeh v'zeh b'kazayis. So the machlokas is only with regard to biur. We are really severely restricting and limiting the scope of the machlokas between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, because as far as achila is concerned, there's no machlokas. Both Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai agree that both sior and chametz is b'kezayis. The machlokas is as far as beer is concerned. Beit Shammai say that you violate the Yisur by your Rabbi Motzei with sior b'kezayis and chametz b'kosevus. And Beis Hillel holds zev b'kezayis. Anyanami hochi. We bring a further support text from a brisa that only as far as beer do we have machlokas Beis Hillel Beit Shammai, but not as far as achila. The pasuk says matzos ye'ochel kol shiv'ei matzos ye'ochel eis shivas hayomim v'lo yirah lecha chametz v'lo yirah lecha sior v'chol gvulecha. Zeu machlokas shebeit Shammai shebein Beit Shammai Beis Hillel. Shebeit Shammai omrim, with regard to beer, with regard to ownership, and Bal Yerobay Motzei, that's the or because zayis v'chametz b'kosevus. Beis Hillel omrim zev b'kezayis. We see clearly from this brisa that only with regard to Bal Yerobay Motzei do we have machlokas Beis Hillel Beit Shammai, but not as far as achil is concerned. Now we're shifting to the last part of the Mishnah, and that is Kisi Adam in a case of Shchitas Chaya or Oaf. And the Torah says, Vayikra Yudzayin ve'ish ish mibnei Yisrael minagera garbet solcham asher yatzud sayid seid chaya o oaf asher ye'ochel v'shafach es damo v'chiso ba'ofer. Those are the last two words are the key words. With regard to behema, shechting behema, there's no chi of kisi dam, as the Gemara establishes in Chulin Daf Pei Daled, and that's derived from a pasuk in the parsha of behema. It says Rak Adam lo solchelu ala artz tipshechenu kamayim. So the Torah in the parsha of behema equates the dam with mayim, and the Gemara derives that just like mayim does not need kisui, so too dam does not need kisui. When machlokas tanoim, in the case of someone who wants to shecht a chayav v'of on yontif, if he has ofar muchan, then fine. But if he doesn't have ofar muchan, then what should he do? Hashochet chayav v'of b'yontif, Beit Shammai omrim yachbar b'deker v'yechase, u'Beis Hillel omrim lo yishchot elim kein hoyelo ofar muchan mibod yom. The Gemara is now going to analyze the machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai hold yachbar b'deker v'yechase, Beis Hillel omrim lo yishchot elim kein hoyelo ofar muchan mibod yom. So Gemara says the language of the Tana is hashochet with a hey b'tchiloso, and that implies im shachat, and that's called b'diavad. He went ahead and he shechted on yontif without preparing the ofar on erev yontif. That's when Beit Shammai allow you lachbar b'deker ulechasos. Once you're faced with the situation of b'diavad, and there's a mitzvah of kisi adam, then will allow you to be v'chas the dam and fulfill that mitzvah. But l'chatchila lo. Even Beit Shammai will agree that we will not allow you to shech the animal, the chay or the oaf, on yontif if you didn't prepare offer muchan mibod yom. So the Gemara says, hey, Masechet, how are you going to reconcile yourself with the seifa of our mission? It says, Beis Hillel omrim lo yishchot, which implies that dafka according to Beis Hillel lo yishchot, Michlal Tanna Kama, implying that Beis Shammai savar yishchot. They will allow lechatchila to shecht on yontif, even in the absence of ofra muchan and yachbar b'deker v'yichase. So how do we reconcile that with the language of the Tanna Kama hashochet, which is mashma b'diavad? Then it's mutar but not lechatchila. Gemara answers holo kasha. We can reconcile this. When Beis Hillel say lo yishchot v'yichase ka'amar, they weren't responding to Beit Shammai except on the din of Kisi Adam. Beit Shammai said that if he shechted b'diavad and he has no offer muchan, then yachpar v'yichas. On that, Beis Hillel respond lo yishchot, meaning even b'diavad, if he shechted, he should not complete the shechita with Kisi Adam. So therefore, there's no diuk here that according to Beit Shammai, you're allowed l'chatchila to shech. Only if he already shechted, then it's mutar mimechasa es hadam. The Gemara rejects this. Amos Seifa. Let's look at the next part of the mission of the words of Beis Hillel. Modim, Beis Hillel concede to Beit Shammai, she, meaning b'diavad, im shachat, yachpar b'deker v'yichasa. Michlal, we can infer from this, since Beis Hillel are admitting, they concede that if he shechted b'diavad, he should be chofer b'deker v'yichasa, implying that Bereisha, where Beit Shammai said in the Reisha that you're allowed to be chofer, bedeker, and lechasos, lav di'evidim. They weren't talking about a case where he shechted it b'di'evid. They were matir shchita l'chatchila, to be chofer and to be chasa. Because if Beit Shammai would only be matir b'di'evid, then why, what's the machlokus here between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai? And furthermore, the lashon of hashochet implies that only b'di'evid are you allowed to be chofer and mechasa, but not shchita l'chatchila. My answer is, our Rabba, really Beit Shammai are matir shchita even l'chatchila, even in the absence of offer mucha mibodyon. And even though in general the word hashochet usually would imply b'di'evid, here we have no choice but to interpret it as l'chatchila. Hachikam. This is how we can explain the Tana. Hashochet, meaning somebody who wants to shech a chayer and off on yontif, and he doesn't have offer muchan from erev yontif. Sheboli molech, he comes to consult with the rabbi. What should he do? Ketzad omerlo. And what should we answer? Meaning the nichal. How should he answer the shoel? Beit Shammai say you should answer momelo shchot chafar v'chasei, that you're allowed l'chatchil to shecht it, and then to dig into the ground with a shovel and cover the dam. Beis Hillel omrim lo yishchot. He should not shecht a chayer and ofad yotiv. Elim kain haylo ofar buchan mibod yom. And the reason why Rabbah uses this language, and he mentions the words of Beis Hillel, even though we never really had a kasha, we were only asking a kasha for the words of Beit Shammai, that's going to be clarified a little later when we get to Rav Yosef and Abai. Rav Yosef Omar, an alternative answer to this problem, and how to explain Beit Shammai, is hashochet hachikoma. Hashochet, somebody wants to shech t'chai v'rofan yontif, and he doesn't have over mucha b'bod yom, sheboli molech, Kate said, Omelo, what should we say to him? Beit Shammai omer lo lech chafar, and then and only then shchot v'chasei. In other words, not like Rabbah said before that we tell the shochet that he could shecht it and then be chofer, but here, according to Rav Yosef's interpretation, what Beit Shammai says is Omer lo chafar, that first he has to do the chafira. He can't shecht it and then do the chafira. Beis Hillel omrim lo yishchot, he shouldn't shecht a chay v'yof b'yontif, elam kein hayolom ofar muchan mibod yom. Now the Gemara wants to explain the machlok shin Rab and Rav Yosef. Amalei Abai Rav Yosef lema mar v'Rabba. Shall we assume that my respected master, meaning Rav Yosef, and Rabba bid Rab Zera Rav Kamifli, their machlokes revolves about the ruling of Rabbi Zera, the name of Rav. The Omer Rab Zera Omer Rav. Hashochet tzok sheyitein offer lamata, and the offer lamal. there should be offer placed underneath the dam. That means the offer is placed before the shechita. And then after the shechita, on top of the dam, he should pour offer. Shenemar. And where does Rav derive this from? The double offer lamata, offer lamala. It says in the pasuk, the ish mibnei Yisrael minagera garb tzolcham asher yatzud seid chaya o of asher yachel v'shafach es domo v'chiso be'afar. And we're gonna emphasize the be'afar, the base. Afar lo nema. It doesn't say that he should cover it with afar, ela be'afar, as if to say that the dam is covered by afar. That means that the dam is surrounded by afar. There's afar lamata, and even before he does the kisui lamala, he already has the dam, so to speak, absorbed into the afar, which is lamata. So from this word be'afar, the extra bays, Rav derives his conclusion that we need afar lamata and afar lamala. So Abai now concludes his presentation. The Mar, meaning Rav Yosef, Islay de Rabbi Zera. He holds like Rabbi Zera, therefore he has to be chofer, and he has to prepare the offer before the shechita, so that it'll have afar lamata. For Rabbi Leslie de Rabbi Zera, he never accepted the drasha and the conclusion of Rabbi Zera, and you don't need offer milamata, and therefore after the shechita, it's fine, it's sufficient if he does the chafira for the purpose of kisei adam lamala bilvad. And now Rav Yosef rejects Abai. Amaleh. No. We're not arguing about Rabbi Zera. Bein l'didi, bein l'Rabba Islan, Rabbi Zera. Even Rabba agrees there was never a debate that we accept Rabbi Zera's shita that we need offer lamata and offer lamala. V'hach mifliginon. Here's what the machlokus is all about. Rabba Savar ika offer lamata in lo. Rabba holds that if the shochet who comes to shecht on yontif has already offer muchan lemata on erev yontif, so you can shecht on top of the offer, and the dam will go on top of the lower layer of the offer. Then you're allowed to shecht immediately, and then go ahead and do the chafira to cover the dam milamal. Ilo, if he doesn't have offer muchan in order to shecht, then lo, even Beit Hillel, even Beit Shammai would not allow you and permit you to do the chafir l'tzorch yontiv. Why not? Chaishina and Dilma, perhaps, mimlach v'lo shachit. If he hasn't prepared the offer milamata, maybe he'll change his mind and he won't shecht it. And if at the end of the day he doesn't shecht it, then lechinam, for no purpose did he do the chafir on yontiv, and he violates the malach of charisha. And that's what Rabbah means. Omrim lo lech shchot chafar ukaseh. Meaning, only if we can tell him shecht it immediately because he already prepared the offer of lamata, now we can be matir to shecht. And then he'll do the chafira to cover the dam milamala. But if we have to tell him sheyachba, because he has no offer muchad, fulamata, then we're not going to allow him to shecht udidi. But I myself, says Rav Yosef, on the contrary, ha'adifa, I would find it preferable to allow him, to give him license to be chofer before the shechita. And forget about this gzera to prohibit the chafira because maybe he'll change his mind. The elo sharisle, if you're not going to allow him to do the chafir before the shechita on yontiv, then sometimes he won't have offer muchan from erev yontiv. He won't be able to shecht on yontiv. The asalim nue misimchas yontiv, and as a result, he won't have simchas yontiv because he won't shecht. The Mishnah says modim Beis Hillel Beit Shammai she'im shachat sheyachbar b'deker v'yechaseh. Rabbi Zera, Rabbi Yehuda, Vehu, that which Beis Hillel allowed you to shech l'chaim va'of, b'di'evet on Yontif, lachbar b'deker, in order to be mechased the dam, is ksheshlo deker notes mibodjom. At the very least, he has a spade that is dug into the ground before Yontif. And then it's considered kechafur, as if he had already done the chafir. And therefore, there's no iser of taking the deker with the dirt and lifting it up. But if he doesn't have a deker notes, then he's not allowed to dig in the shovel into the karka on Yontif and dig, because that chafir is also be Yontif. It's a tolda of Meleches Choresh. And the mitzvah of Kisei Adam, which is in the Pasuk Sobri offer, is not powerful enough to override the lotas of malacha, of the Yisra malacha on Yontif, where the Torah says in Parshas Yisro lo sasa kol malacha. So Gemara raises the following objection to Rabbi Yehuda. If this be the case, and we don't say that the mitzvah of Kisei Dam could override the Yisra malacha on Yontif, v'ha ka'avid k'tisha. Even if he has a deker notes in the karka on Erev Yontif, still he's going to have to pulverize what's called k'tisha, the clumps of ground, the rigvei adama, and make the afar into a smooth, layer of afar. And with regard to rigvei adama, these clumps of earth, they are stuck together. They're not royal lekitzu. You need the k'tisha, and that would be a malacha of tochen. So since the mitzvah of Kisei Adam does not override the mitzvah losas of Yisra malacha, then certainly k'tisha, to be kotesh to offer for the purpose of Kisei Adam, would be prohibited. How then can you be matir chafira for that purpose? Even if it's a case of deker notes, but you still have to contend with the violation of Meleches K'tisha. Rab Chia bar Ashi Rav, and here we turn to Daf Ches. Be offered tichoach. You're right. Deker notes, but karkam bojom is not enough to be matir chafira on Yontif for Kisei Adam. He needs, in addition to a deker notes, offer tichuach. He needs thin soil that's royally Kisei Adam that doesn't require k'tisha. So we have two requirements in order to allow shchita on Yontif. Number one, we need a deker notes, and that resolves and circumvents the problem of chafira and the violation of charisha. And in addition to that, we need afar tichach, soft, chopped up afar, because if you're left with rigdei adama and you're going to have to do k'tisha, then you violate the malach of tochen. The mitzvah say of Kisei Adam does not override a losas of malacha on Yontif. The Gemara later on is going to talk about why that's so. So Gemara continues to ask a kasha here. You're not being matir the Yisra malacha on Yontif for the purpose of the mitzvah of Kisei Adam. So I don't think deker notes, but karka v'bodom should be sufficient. Why? V'ha'ka'avid guma. Meaning, he has the spade dug into the ground, but now he has to remove the afar. When he does so, he creates a hole in the ground, and that's a malacha of boneh. Now, when we say it's a malacha boneh, so that's usually only true inside the house. If it's outside the house, then it's a malach of choresh, and that's a sugi in Shabbos Daf Kuf Beis. So the Gemara answers, Kidder Rabbi Abba. Tiyom Rabbi Abba, Chofer Guv Shabbos, V'ein Tzorch El Yafra Potter Ale. When he digs a hole, not for the purpose of changing the karka, or in the case of a soda, to plant in that hole, but rather he just needs to get access to offer. If he could go into a store and get a bag of offer, he'd be perfectly satisfied with it. And in that case, he's potter. He doesn't violate the Isur Harisha, nor the Isur Boneh. And here we have a Rashi. Rashi says potter, and he quotes the Gemara in Chagiga 2 lines down from the top, and that is, it is Mekalkel, call Mekalkel in Pturin. So he's basically, instead of improving the karka, he is doing something detrimental to the karka, and Mekalkel on Shabbos and Yom Tov is potter. And since our mission is talking about chofer, where he's digging just because he needs the offer for Kisei Adam, he has no need in the Guma, there's no Isa Malach on Shabbos of Boneh, of creating a Guma. He's not at all improving the karka. His interest is only getting access to the offer for Kisei Adam, and therefore that's called Mekalkin, called Mekalkel in Pturin. Now you have to keep in mind that we have a rule in Shabbos that called Mokum Shenemar Potter, it means Potter Avalasim, and Rabbanan it's awesome. So this is a case of Potter Avalasim. And not only that, let's say that here it's a Malach Shein Tzricha Gufa and it's Mekalkel. So Rashi is focused on the Mekalkel element, but if you add the boot Malach Shein Tzricha Gufa, meaning he doesn't need the Gufa Malach, namely the Chafira, the Guma, then we pass like Reb Shimon, and Malach Shein Tzricha Gufa itself is only also Midrabbanan. So if we pile together these two Rabbanans, Mekalkel and Eina Tzricha Gufa, then it becomes Potter Umutter. But again, we require that it be Decker notes Mibod Yom, so that he should not violate Ke'en Chafira. And nevertheless, Beis Hillel did not allow you to be Chofer B'Decker to cover up the dam, unless B'di'evet already did the Shechita. They would not allow this L'chatchila because of Gzeira Shema Pa'am Yitztarech Lichtosh as a Ofar V'Yavar Al Iser Tochen. So this is where we're going to stop on the top of Daf Ches Amud Aleph, and we're up to the third line, She'efer Kira Muchanhu. Thank you very much.